At this point that God started to cause me to do some editing, to do some rereading of my story, where He started to really convict me, about what I claimed to believe. I was lucky to grow up in a Christian home where I was at least presented with, some of these backstories. But there still came a point where, even though I believed in God and I believed in salvation through Christ, I hadn't yet really wrestled with, Belinda, if you believe in me and you believe what I say is true, you have to make a decision whose authority you're going to take on what reality is, what truth is. So in rereading my story, I started to look at, what are the things that He said of me? What are the things that He's shown are actual qualities to who I am? So if I reread some of those labels I took on, I read that I was purposefully unique. I noticed that He made me a die-hard romantic. That one of the things that's always spoken to me was that I have this drive, I want romantic relationship. And I seem to be convinced that it can tell me something about myself that nothing else can. So for a girl who has never had that, in the context where that seemed to be damaging, God was rewriting it in the light of showing me how He put that in me to point me to Him. Because if I had been able to, if I hadn't had that quality, I may have missed Him in my story. B, if I had been able to quench that desire with a relationship in this world, with a relationship, with a guy, I don't know how long it would have taken me to go searching to basically get to the point where I recognized the love of my life, the love that I was made for. He made me an incurable optimist and an observer, a lover of stories, so that I would do this rewriting process, rereading and rewriting. And it was as I continued to grow and walk with Him, as I continued to really walk out in each context, when I feel rejected, when I start to try to draw conclusions from what my experience is speaking to me, that God was showing me how to go to His Word, how to prioritize His truth over the truth of my experience. So I covered some of this just now, just attentively reading my story while walking alongside Him, examining my motivations, like when I started to feel empty, when I started to feel lonely, any of those things, really having to examine what it was I was seeking and make sure that I changed where I wanted to get that from, to let it be some quiet time with God. I spent a lot of Fridays, really a lot of any days, intentionally alone and set apart for Him to really develop that relationship. And essentially not allowing myself to settle for counterfeit rewards, but rather to commit myself to what He says. You can actually go ahead to the next slide. Basically, in all of this, what I found through this was I was surprised, as I continued to walk this out, by how the things that He told me about myself started to feel true for me. Because for a lot of us, we get caught up on, like I believe it's true, but like I want to feel it. And I think that last season when I came to this group, I wanted to feel it more. Like I believe the truth that's in the Word, but I wanted Him to get me to the next level of relationship where it was so true about me that it was the only reality that I saw. And I saw Him doing that, and not just in we're playing these mind and heart games with ourselves, but in a sense where when I started to see myself through His eyes, when I started to see that He intentionally chose the details about how He made me, I started to, it opened up this whole new world to me where I started to see, like, I will not happen again. You will not happen again. You were chosen exactly as you are. And even the current expression of His image that I'm displaying, could stand could stand some growth, could stand to take on more health. That's his purpose in my life, and he will bring that about. So when I started chasing him, he started to bring those things about. I started making healthier choices, about how I treat my body, what I put in it to fuel it, how I exercise it and keep it a strong tool for his uses. So the amazing thing was the weight problem that I, thought I was saddled with for years started to disappear. My complexion started to clear up as I took on more and more health. And this isn't to say, obviously, that I'm there yet. This is something I continue to battle out, but it's been so freeing for me to not go seeking in all of the places that we're told by the world, which I don't know how the world gets our stamp of approval for being our basis of rightness or expertise when the world's just as lost as we ever were. Just to see how he started to make his truth mine and how I found my identity in him. I think I've gone over some of this as I've been kind of sharing, so we can go to the next slide. Your story, why you guys are here. We here at Body and Soul believe that your story is worth reading. And we believe that because God tells us it is. He's given each one of us a story because it's his story. Our stories are his. Your story is purposeful. God, when he chose the details of each one of us, we look at the analogies of him, of him creating us, almost as tools or vessels to accomplish his purposes here in the world, but also for his enjoyment. That he chose the details of you to be embraced, to be chased after, to be received, because he has great purposes for us that we haven't even conceived of yet until we own them, until we really value them the way that he values them. We can't get to our purposes if we're constantly trying to fix the things that we think he messed up in. So when we can acknowledge he didn't mess up, he chose these things, and I want to see why this is such a needed thing in his kingdom, why it's such a beautiful characteristic to him. Your story is also one of redemption and glory, and this really convicts me. When I'm reading my story to myself, because our stories continue, so even though I've read my story as one of redemption and glory, I'm no less susceptible to turn around the next day and have a situation where I'm like, my circumstances suck, God must be against me in this instance. And so it's convicting to us because if we are ever reading our stories as anything but redemptive, as anything but for his glory, it's probably a clue that we need to be doing some editing of the stories we tell ourselves. Your story is useful as a space for exploration, so that's why we want to give, Lord willing, so much time in our small groups to really explore, based on your experience, based on your story, how does this connect? How does the truth of what God tells us connect? And where is he taking me? What does he want me to do in the reading, editing, and basically co-authoring of our stories from here on out with him. And finally, the story is the battlefield in which you'll apply the tools that you'll gain here. So, the tools that we seek to equip you with as we focus on, what it looks like to employ our spiritual armor, what it looks like to really go to the Word, to pray in the Spirit at all times, and our stories. Aside from your individual story, we believe we're all here together because our stories are the continuation of his story. The story didn't stop here. I know oftentimes Brian Tome, if you go to Crossroads, or if not, our lead pastor often talks about how the Bible, you should see it as God's love letter to you. That love letter doesn't end in the container of this book, but rather many of us have found that this directly applies